Hello, and welcome, and hopefully welcome back to the Alpha Male Podcast. The podcast, we're not ashamed of what we're created to be. Strong, dominant men made in the image of God. Today we're going to talk about a manly topic, fire. There's just something primal and manly about fire, I think. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to plug in the bio. If you want to skip around 3 minutes and 45 seconds. And then we will get into the day's topic. Who am I? A question we should all ask ourselves. I am, first and foremost, a servant of God, made in His very own image. A follower of Jesus Christ. A simple man called by God to the Great Commission to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Next, a little bit about my background and what God has allowed me to do and blessed me to do in life. Grew up what most would consider very poor in the backwoods of the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States, hunting and fishing. Joined the Marine Corps at 17. Did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. So a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran. Infantry assaultman. After the combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also a veteran of law enforcement. I served with LAPD. I was a sworn peace officer, a cop for LAPD. I worked regular patrol assignments and more specialized assignments. One of those more specialized assignments was warrant service, fugitive recovery. Also had some other law enforcement roles. I am an FBI certified firearms instructor and been certified by another 3-letter government agency in a lot of firearms and training things. I've also been a private contractor, worked in the private sector pertaining to tactics and gunfighting and protecting America from enemies foreign and domestic. I served as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters in a large metropolitan area. That was our primary mission, to stop active shooters, which sadly are a thing in America today. I've also been blessed to do quite a bit of competition shooting. Started my first formal competitions even before joining the Marine Corps at 17. I had won more shooting competitions than I can remember. I have competed in all manner of disciplines in shooting. I've been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion, West Coast regional champion. Like I said, been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Mentioned hunting. I've hunted to put meat on the table starting when I was a child. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide, hunting and slaying all manner of beast. And I don't apologize for that. Humbled to be the host of 3 podcasts. Simple Man Sermons, Alpha Male Podcast, and Gunfighter Life. Obviously, as things not mentioned, I've been blessed to do many other things. But, again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, a believer and follower of the Bible, the Word, Jesus Christ. And I don't apologize for that. With that, let's transition into today's topic. So, fire. One of the things I think a lot of men really enjoy. Knives, guns, of course, women, and fire. quintessential, primeval manliness, fire. In fact, the notes comprising the notes for this episode are thus: one word, fire. And out of all the show topics I had written down, this one called to me. I've recently been rereading Genesis. In fact, my Bible is right beside me. Let me bust out Genesis. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God made everything. He made us in his very own image. We are unique. We are special as human beings. You can not believe that. You can choose not to believe that if you want, but you're wrong. We are special. We are unique. God made us that way, and I don't apologize for what I was made. We have dominion. We are called to have dominion, and we should have dominion. One of the ways we have dominion over our environment is fire. We're the only fleshly, earthly beings that harness the power and use fire for many different tasks. For light, for most of human existence, it wasn't electric lights until very recently in human terms. Fire meant light. Whether it's a literal fire, like a heap of wood on fire, or a torch, or a candle, or a lantern. It was all fire. Fire gives light. And if you've ever been in the woods at night or in any environment when it's dark without modern electricity, you'll know what a blessing light is. Fire equals light. You cannot have fire without light. Something also important is smoke. Smoke is useful for a lot of things. We think of that as kind of a byproduct, but it's very beneficial. If you've ever tried to preserve meat, smoking is a primary way to preserve food. Smoke also very useful if you've ever been out, as I have been recently, living off grid, especially in the Oregon rainforest or in any forest. Bugs, mosquitoes, bugs that bite. Smoke is a great blessing to keep them at bay. It is a wonderful thing. Smoke also for signaling. Long before there were cell phones, smoke signals were a thing. Smoke is not just a thing that makes you cough when you're sitting around a campfire. It is a huge blessing and useful for a lot of things. Obvious for humans and fire is cooking. We like to cook our food a lot of times. As much as I like cutting open a deer and eating raw meat, I will concede that roasting it over a fire with some salt and black pepper is better. It is a more delicious way to eat meat. Even my dog, who, when we go out hunting, he's eating raw birds, but he prefers his meat cooked. Cooking is a great blessing. It adds the flavor and enjoyment. Not only that, roasting meat over a fire just adds something more than the meal itself. Especially if you're doing it with friends, and especially with close friends and family. Cooking over an open fire is just things that we have done and enjoyed as men, as humans for millennia. I kind of think we miss out on that today with our just crank a knob on a stove, getting around a fire. If you've ever cooked on an open fire, whether it's an elk or a deer or a fish, it takes time and it takes skill to get that fire quite right and the right temperature consistently, and to not burn your meat and to not undercook your meat. I think we miss out on a lot of that time where we're so hurried to do other tasks, and getting a meal is kind of an afterthought. Kind of miss out when you get a meal in a drive-thru or you get a meal delivered. Sometimes the preparation of the meal with your family is as much a blessing as the meal itself. But fire and cooking obviously go hand in hand. We don't often think of this today, but in the woods where I go out in, there are, in this area, wolves and bear and mountain lion. Animals are afraid of fire. Animals don't like fire. Don't think that was a small thing to our ancestors to keep dangerous beasts at bay. Have dominion over your environment. And part of that having dominion is to be able to go to sleep safely and not be in fear. And part of that, fire. Important. Fire is useful for a lot of other tasks. Boiling water. Dirty water is a major killer in a lot of disasters. And although you can certainly bathe in a cold creek, I have certainly done that, and bathed in cold water more than I can remember, making hot water is a great, great blessing. And before there were just plug-and-play hot water heaters, the way you did that, again, was fire. Making weapons, whether it's simply hardening the point of a wooden spear, maybe one of the first and simplest weapons, just a wooden stick hardened in a fire with a point hardened to make a deadlier weapon, or putting rocks laden with brass and bronze and later iron into a fire to smelt it and to forge it and to make deadly weapons, to have dominion over our environment, whether it's a weapon or an implement or a tool. Part of that having dominion that makes us unique. Making, not just picking up a stick and using it, but making a spear, making an axe, making a saw. That all has its roots in fire. Right up there with light is warmth. When you're cold, a fire is a huge, huge blessing and may literally mean the difference between dying and surviving. So from death to survival to thriving in your environment, cooking and making tools and weapons, fire. Men have been using it and harnessing it for millennia. And there is something quintessential and manly about fire. If you've ever been alone in the wilderness, I recently did a trip in the wilderness. I think this will come out after I talk about that trip. But if you've ever been alone in the wilderness and it's dark and you waited a little bit too long to make camp, you'll know what a blessing is when you finally get that fire started and you feel that warmth and you put your cold feet by a fire. You're able to have some meat to roast over that fire that you acquired in the wilderness that day. You'll know what a blessing it is and what an uplift to your spirit it is to have fire. Already 12 minutes and something into this podcast, and with one word for notes in this podcast, fire. Fire is manly. And just like any alpha male that I'm aware of, they like knives. They like weapons. They like women, because we're men and we're attracted to women. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's good and manly and the way it should be. And we're also attracted to fire. We like fire. So maybe in a lot of men's today, suburbia life, we need some more fire. We need, even if it's just grilling meat on a grill, and I'm not talking about, I guess a gas grill is still fire, propane grill is still fire, but maybe a wood fire. You know, if you have a standard charcoal grill, you can still use wood. Charcoal is fine, but there's something about a wood fire that I think is even more manly than other types of fire. Just literally gathering wood. Even if you live in suburbia, maybe going out in the woods and just gathering wood and bringing it back to a grill. But if you can, making a fire in the woods, in the wilderness, with your own two hands, there's something very manly about that. Sometimes it's good to be by yourself in solitude and just sit by a fire and meditate with God and be circumspect and consider life and ponder it. Cook meat over a fire, or just sit and watch the fire. Sometimes it's uplifting to the spirit to do that in a group, in a tribe, if you have it, with your wife, with your kids, with your friends. If you've listened for any length of time, you'll know that I'm big on EDC, and we'll start transitioning out of the manliness of fire and the man's attraction and use for fire into ways to make fire and to have fire at the ready. You'll know that I'm big on EDC, everyday carry. I think that's part of your job as a man, to be ready, to watch and be ready, to be able to provide and protect yourself and your loved ones. Love your neighbor as yourself. Part of that is protecting and providing. Part of that is EDC. I think part of your EDC should be a way to make fire. In today's modern world, one of the easiest ways to do that is a lighter. And I sometimes do carry a lighter as part of my EDC, but not often. What I'll generally carry at a minimum, since I already carry a knife, and if you're a man, I recommend you carry a knife. And I have no sponsors, get no kickbacks. I recommend a buck 110 if you're talking pocket knife EDC. Most men don't carry a fixed blade. But I generally do. I carry a knife, a fixed blade for me, most of the time, and a ferrocerium rod. A ferrocerium rod, if you don't know, is just a mixture of iron and other elements that when struck makes a spark and throws off sparks to make a fire. That's part of my EDC. I encourage you to make it part of your EDC. Even my ultralight EDC, when I'm like out running and doing sprints and things like that, even then, even that little light ultralight knife has a ferro rod in it. Want to see what I'm talking about, and especially the useful size of a ferro rod if you actually plan on making fires with it. Go to the website, goodshepherdtraining.com. That's the website for this podcast, goodshepherdtraining.com. There's a bailout bag, baby bug out bag on there. It has a ferro rod in it if you want to see what I'm talking about and you want to see the size that I'm talking about to be useful. It'll give you an idea. You don't have to buy the bag or anything. I'm not trying to sham wow you. If you want to see what I'm talking about or check out pictures of me or wilderness adventures or things like that, there's pictures on there at goodshepherdtraining.com. Anyway, that's part of my EDC. I encourage you to have some way to make a fire part of your EDC. And yes, you can make primitive fires with a bow drill and a hand drill. And I have made an ember with a friction fire. I say that singularly because it is a giant pain in the butt if you've ever done it. Hats off to people that like to do that. There's a reason for a long time flint and steel has been a thing. It is much easier, whether it's flint and steel or a knife and a ferro rod. A lighter is obviously more convenient if it's working, if it has fluid, if it's still sparking, if it's not wet, if it's not super windy, if you haven't fallen on it or broken it and busted it open or something. However, ferro rod will work even if you just pull it out of the water or it's been in water all day or anything like that. It's a very low tech. It's literally a rod of iron and some other elements. My preferred method, you can use whatever you want. You can use waterproof matches as part of your EDC or something like it. But a way to start a fire is important. It's just part of general manliness. I don't care if you work in a cubicle and live in the suburbs. You ought to consider having a way to make fire and start fire. I don't apologize for doing this podcast and trying to forge strong, dominant men. To make godly men strong and bring strong men to God. I don't apologize for that. And I don't apologize for trying to make you men more prepared either. I hope you'll consider having this or something like it as part of your EDC. If you think you should have a way but you don't want a big ferrocerium rod, I forget where I even found these, but I have a bunch. I have them on like my wife's hiking pack and my baby bug out bag. And one's in my pocket right now on one of my EDC knives. It's a ferrocerium rod with 2 holes drilled in it that you can put on like a keychain or a lanyard. At the bare minimum, if you carry a keychain, you could throw one of these on your lanyard. It just looks like a little steel rod. Nobody's going to bat an eye on it. Not TSA, not anybody. Literally just a little metal rod. And no matter if it gets wet or it's on there for 100 years, you literally have a way to make a fire. The most common EDC knife has a much bigger ferro rod. In fact, the same size ferro rod, I think maybe even the exact same one that is included in the baby bug out bags, the bailout bags, for good reason. That size, the size you'll see in that picture, is kind of the best size if you actually plan on starting fires. Not like in an emergency and at least I have something, but you actually plan on going out in the wilderness and starting fires. And there are many other, even more primitive ways to start a fire, but I think you ought to be able to start a fire as a man. Another big part of that is just because you have a spark doesn't mean you're going to get a fire, especially where I'm at in the Pacific Northwest in the rainforest. You know, I've heard stories of grown men around like a grill with everything and a lighter and not being able to start a fire. Knowing how to not just get a spark and being able to get a spark, that's primary. Obviously, you need to be able to make a spark to get a fire going, but you need to know how to build a fire. And I wish I could take all you men out on like a wilderness retreat and we build a fire and sit around it and then you guys would build another fire and another fire. Just like any other skill, practicing it is going to make you better at it in general. Finding dry tinder is of utmost importance. Funny little aside here. When we moved to the Pacific Northwest recently, I had been going out in the wilderness and experimenting making fires, even when I didn't need one, so I'd be able to make one when I needed one. And I got home and I told my wife I needed to up my Tinder game. And she gave me kind of a sideways, quizzical look. Because in today's culture, Tinder is like the dating app. And it took her a second to put together that I was talking about actual Tinder. Tinder is important for a fire. Having dry tinder, like a tree that has fallen over, that's still got bark on it, but the inside of the wood has started to rot and it's dry even when everything else around it is wet, or an upstanding dead tree, or let's say, dry dead moss on a tree, dry grass if you're out on a grassland or a desert. And having tinder and having enough of it. Nothing is more frustrating than working really hard to get a spark into a flame and then starting your tinder and then realizing you don't have enough to catch your bigger wood on fire. Fire, especially we're talking like wood primitive fire, should be a progressive thing. You get your spark and you get your easiest to light tinder and then slightly bigger and slightly bigger and slightly bigger and slightly bigger. You may have several steps, 3, 4, 5 progressions before you get to something the size of, let's say, a pencil. Small and hopefully dry tinder to get a fire started. That is a skill. Knowing how to build and keep a fire going and keeping it the right size is a skill. Not just building the biggest fire you can, unless you're trying to go out and with your buddies and have a bonfire, but having a useful fire that's not too big, that's not too hot for cooking, for things like that. It's a skill. And it's a skill you probably would enjoy. If you don't have that skill and haven't practiced it recently, get out. Get out in the woods, assuming you're not in like a wildfire zone or something, and make a fire and use fire for whatever task. Even if you just go out with your Bible and make a fire and bring out your metal coffee cup and boil some water and have a hot, fresh cup of coffee by a fire by yourself in the woods. I think you'd enjoy it. A lot of our modern conveniences are great blessings. But just because you can go through a drive-thru doesn't mean you generally should. Convenience is not always better in life. Sometimes working with your hands, making a fire, starting a fire, building a fire, and especially sitting around a fire, enjoying the fruits of your labor, enjoying the warmth of the work of your hand that God has blessed you to be able to do, and thinking about Him making you in His image and giving you dominion and being able to make that fire. Those things can be a great blessing. Don't be robbed of those by today's modern culture and society. Anyway, those are some thoughts on fire. Tactical tip of the day. I've mentioned this before. Don't remember if it was this podcast or Gunfighter Life. But tactical tip of the day. Hopefully if you're a man and you're old enough and you live in a place that allows you carry a gun day to day as part of your EDC. Hopefully you're part of the well-regulated, well-armed militia of modern Minutemen that stand ready to provide and protect for you and your neighbor. If you have a gun, obviously guns work. They're called firearms for a reason. They produce fire. Well, you can start a regular fire with a firearm, whether it's a handgun, a rifle, a shotgun. And again, if you want to be good at this skill like any other skill, I encourage you to go out and practice it. You got an old Mosin Nagant or something laying around. You got a high point as a trunk gun or something like that. You can get out and practice this skill. If you know how pretty much all modern cartridges are put together, you have your projectile in the top, and you have powder, and then you have a primer. So, however you want to remove the projectile carefully from that cartridge, you do that. Once it's almost removed, you carefully remove the vast majority of that gunpowder. You can remove it all or leave a few little flecks in there, depending on your cartridge and how long your barrel is. And you should experiment with this if you're not familiar with your gun and your cartridge and how it works. But either just a primer or a few grains of powder. You don't want a lot, because if it flies too fast, you may extinguish the fire. And then you rip off part of your clothing or an old rag or a paper towel or a shop towel or whatever. A small enough piece to fit inside that cartridge, you shove it in there, you put it in the gun, you use the gun itself, the firearm, to hit that firing pin to light that cloth on fire. Hopefully you've done this right and there's enough to get it out of the barrel. You fire it at some rocks or some sand or something like that. Not into your tinder because it's probably going to blow it everywhere. Blow your tinder everywhere. But fire it into some sand or some rocks or something, a big piece of wood. Fire it into that, grab it, throw it in your tinder that you have saved your gunpowder, and maybe mix some of that gunpowder the right ratio so it's not going to flare up and burn you. But having that mixed into your tinder, throw that burning rag, that smoldering rag, into your tinder, blow on it, and get your fire started. It's a way to make fire with a firearm. That's your tactical tip of the day. Mere knowledge is not mastery. I encourage you to go out, however you want to, and know how to make a fire and be familiar with it. That's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. You'll find in the Gospel of John. Therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he had removed it, and plunging into the sea. But the other disciples came in the little boat, for they were not far from land, but about 200 cubits, dragging the net with fish. Then, as soon as they had come to land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish which you have caught." You see our Savior, our Lord Jesus Christ here, sitting by a fire, cooking food on a fire, providing for the ones that he loved. You likewise walk as he walked. Be able to provide for yourself and those that you love. With that, men, be strong, be blessed, and have a blessed day.